Okay, thank you very much. So my name's Mary Milne. I'm the campaigns manager at Traidcraft, and I've previously worked at Age UK and Christian Aid, and I'm here to talk to you about why campaigning isn't just for millennials. And I think perhaps I've just been fortunate to end up, and I would say fortunate, to end up in organisations which perhaps have particularly large supporter bases of people who are not millennials. So, very quickly, a little bit of audience participation. I would like you to shout out the first word that comes into your mind when I say a campaigner. So a few people. Committed. Sorry? Dedicated. Passionate. Stubborn. Protest. Activist. What was the other? Mischievous. One more. Contrary. Brilliant. Okay, now I would like you to do the same thing and just shout out the first word that comes into your head when I say getting older. Tired. Frail. Grumpy. Sorry? Dread. Right. Okay, there was another one up there. Stubborn. Wise. Anyone else? Experienced. Brilliant. So that was a bit of a high-risk exercise. But I guess my point is that the stereotypical campaigner is young, passionate, maybe a bit reckless, possibly naive. And I don't know if you've had this experience. I have certainly. In many organisations, senior management will say, oh, well, if we did some campaigning, that would help us reach a younger audience. And the stereotypical older person is cautious, conservative, perhaps a bit reactionary, and someone who'll resist change. Now, I hope we all know that that is not really the case. Now, I want to just make a quick diversion into naming the generations just to explain the thing about millennials, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but just have a quick think about it. So these are the generations of people who are around today. So the traditionalists or the silent generation, people born before before the end of the Second World War. So people who are now in their 70s, in their 80s, in their 90s, and increasingly 100 plus. The baby boomers, so that's people born from the end of the war to the mid-60s. So those people are now in their 50s and 60s. Generation X, I'm not quite sure which one I go in, but this is people now in their 40s and early 50s. Now, we found out earlier that the vast majority of you are all millennials, I suspect, so people in your 20s and 30s. And then, of course, we have the younger people under 20s, so the centennials. And I also want to give you a little warning that I am clearly going to be making some sweeping generalisations. So, this is a short presentation, so please just take the nuance as stated, and you can grab me afterwards and explain why what I've said is completely untrue, and I'll probably say, yes, that's right. Now, just a few points I just want to bring out. The first point is, the older you are, the more likely you are to vote. These are figures from the 2015 general election. You might not be able to see the detail, but basically, the axis along the bottom is age going up to 65 plus, and then there's turnout by percentage. So one reason why pensioner benefits have been retained, but working age benefits haven't. Now, I'm not making comments on the rights and wrongs of that, but the point is that older people in the UK particularly are politically powerful. So, if you need some political power for your campaign, then perhaps you should think about engaging people over 50. My second point, the older you are, the less likely you are to be online. And I know there are people who buck the trend of this, but I still think it's a valid and important point, especially when people get in their mid-60s or above. Internet use drops off quite quickly. And that includes, the reasons for that is issues about cost, about once you're retired, you might not be using technology through work quite as often. And as you get older, it becomes harder to learn new skills, and the pace of change seems to you can't keep up with. So nearly half of single pensioners have no internet access. It's true that a quarter of over 65s are using social media, but that means 3/4 are not, and over 65, the over 65s are not a homogenous group. There's a huge difference between a sprightly 70-year-old and a frail 85-year-old. So I think in campaigning we're becoming increasingly used to thinking of email and social as our kind of main tools. But if we want to engage with this powerful audience, we might need to think about different ways to reach them. And just a little story, at Traidcraft, we did a petition last summer on business and human rights. We got 20,000 signatures in total, which was brilliant. About 5,000 of those, about a quarter, came online, and 15,000 were generated through pieces of paper. So just think about it. Pieces of paper in the back of churches. It's a great way of getting people. And my final point is that campaigning isn't something new. And I think it's easy to reflect, and this came up earlier, it's easy for us to think, oh, it's all taking off now, people are getting active, but, people who are in their 70s and 80s now were in their 20s and 30s in the 1950s and 60s, so many of them may have been on the peace marches, may have been campaigning for equal pay. I was certainly around and at school in the 80s when the Greenham Common protests were happening. So some of the women who were there, who were in their 30s then, will now be in their 60s. So those people are around, and they're probably in your organisations, and it would be good to talk to them. And I think it's a great idea to think about can we get some of those voices into the campaigning forum. So please don't assume that campaigning was invented in 2010, and please listen to people involved in your campaigns. And I just end with a kind of plea and a challenge to involve all the generations in your campaigns so that we can achieve things together. Thank you.